What's good, everybody? Welcome back to the Big Nate Review. It's your boy Big Nate, and today we have a very interesting question to talk about, one that I think has arguably been on my mind for many years at this point, and that question is, which is harder, the sciences or the humanities? And so we're going to get into a bunch of different aspects of it. I think the way that sort of people think differently, like sort of stigmas around that and everything, but I wanted to just first give a little bit of background about myself, like why I'm even halfway qualified to talk about this. And so I guess so my first degree was in English literature, and parentheses, a minor in philosophy. I think it's relevant. So that was obviously deep in the humanities. And then my degree after that was actually, I did a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, which that one's kind of an in-between one. Like the sciences sort of eschew it, but at the same time it does have very much qualitative or quantitative data driven sort of methods and experiments and everything like that. But anyhow, so that's psychology. So that was a little bit of both. And then I did neuroscience, which I think would be hard science. Then I have a master's in cognitive neuroscience. So a little bit all over the place. And then honestly, the thing that actually kicked this all off is right now I'm actually in a degree for a Bachelor of Science in mathematics. And so we'll get into all that. But anyway, the point being, I feel like I've got enough. I'm not an expert in either of them necessarily, but I do think I've got my foot in the waters of both of them enough to at least, kind of think about this question. And I think the overall division can kind of be characterized by what I think is the idea of, in the sciences and the humanities, what is considered right. Because in the sciences, if you're doing a math problem or a physics problem, there is a correct answer. There is a single exact answer, which if it's not precisely the answer, then it's wrong. And I think a lot of people's minds sort of work in that way, where they find a intellectual comfort, or I don't know what it is. The fact that there is a single right answer and you just have to do whatever you can to sort of converge and find that answer, which once found, you've got it. Versus something like the humanities, where, for instance, I'm reading War and Peace right now. If you were to give a literary analysis of War and Peace, there is no right answer to that question. You can have better or worse sort of analysis and insight to greater and lesser degrees, but there certainly is no right answer in a literary interpretation, in the sense that there's a right answer for the integral from 0 to pi of sine of x or something. They're fundamentally different types of, I think, what is right. And I think with the humanities, that is more of a sort of creative, speculative, interpretive answer, whereas with the sciences, it's exact and precise and sort of rigorous in that way. So to me, that's kind of how I like to characterize the difference between the two of them. Although I think the difference between them is actually not as distinct and hard set as we like to think it is, but we'll come back to that. But one of the things I wanted to address is, I think, at least in my experience, there's very much a stigma in the humanities for not being as difficult or as rigorous as a degree in the sciences. And it's sort of caricaturized oh God, what you're an English major, you got to read a book, that's crazy. Or you're a philosophy, oh shit, you got a thought due on Monday, stuff like that. And I felt this definitely throughout my English degree. There's just a certain degree of condescension that people have, and you'll be talking to adults or whatever, and it's oh, you're going to college, what are you doing? Oh, English lit. That's actually the prototypical example of a useless degree, as people like to think. We'll get onto that. But, and oh, what do you plan to do with that? This, that, and there's always just that level of stigma and just looking down. But I especially noticed this in my science degree, where it's once you're with the science people, and you don't have to play nice, and you can just conspire with one another, they'll very much, talk shit about and look down upon things like English literature, philosophy, all the different humanities. And it's something I won't say I've struggled with it. I'm pretty at peace with my decision and everything to study what I want to study. But it does sort of beg this question. It's always been in the back of my mind, which is harder, the sciences or the humanities? And the funny thing, what prompted this whole video actually was recently, so I'm currently in Calc 2, and I was doing some homework, and one day I just realized, I'm okay, this is pretty fucking, I've been doing Calc for 5 hours. I'm this shit is actually difficult as hell. I'm the sciences might have took the dub on this one, I'm not gonna lie. But then I got to thinking about it too, because I think, so for one, my experience throughout my English degree was to be honest, I really cheated myself. I would spark note stuff, I wouldn't do all the readings, I wouldn't participate as much as I should in discussion. I'm literally out here smoking blunts with the boys, working on my final exam essay. And that's another thing too, that we can talk about. But I think just in general, the amount of rigor that is in universities in practice that's used for the humanities isn't held up to the same standard as for instance, the sciences. But I was thinking, in its ideal form, where you are going through the Western canon, hell, even things like the Eastern canon, but going through some of the most, most ancient, but also most important classic literary texts throughout history, and not only reading them, but reading them at a deep level, deeply insightful, contributing literary analysis, I got to thinking, like, on the one hand, math is super time consuming. Like, it takes like hours of my day to do this. It works this whole other part of my brain, like this whole different part of this different form of thinking. But like, if you compare that to like what an English degree, like I said, in its ideal form ought to be, it's also, to do all that reading is extremely time consuming, and to partake like in real literary analysis, writing critical essays. Maybe it's my bias, but I feel like if you actually did it with that, like a rigorous English literature program or a rigorous philosophy program, if you put them on the scales, I feel like they might more or less be on a par with one another. And like the classic example is like, just imagine an English student or a student of art or film participating, like trying to do like an integral or differential equations, that whole that would never happen. But at the same time, it's like, I think that if you were to take, for just like the average math physics nerd, who in my experience, these are some of like the least creative people I have ever met in my life. Like, and obviously there's exceptions, but like, the average math and physics students does not have like a creative bone in their body. And if you were to throw them into some of the most classic and even like difficult, like Paradise Lost, for example, one of the most difficult but rewarding texts I have ever read, I think or like, War and Peace or The Sound and the Fury or any just sort of like classic text, I think they would seriously struggle even with just basic reading comprehension. Like, I think if you threw a math physics student straight into Paradise Lost, I literally don't even think they would know what's happening, let alone be able to engage in some kind of critical, deep, insightful analysis on the text. So I think that goes both ways. And I think for both people, if you start them off at the right level, like an English person, oftentimes they've had horrible math teachers, like, which was my experience. But like, if you walk them through step by step, I think a person in humanities is absolutely capable of eventually working their way towards like higher mathematics, and also vice versa. You can get a math physics person and just make them go through the pipeline, and eventually they could be doing, real critical analysis. But the thing, it just kind of bugs me when the science people are just so condescending to, the humanities people. And like I said, it goes both ways. Like, for instance, like with like math, physics, engineering, those kind of people that are just hard, calculated computation people that don't have, like I said, a creative bone in their bodies. I've had this experience where it's like you're talking about like a thought experiment. So for instance, like the trolley problem. I know this one's not like the best example, but it's like, imagine there's this runaway trolley and it's on track to hit like some group of people, 3, 4, 5 people, but you as the bystander, you could pull this lever, but you'd have to actively pull it and redirect the trolley to kill instead just one person. So it's obviously this moral dilemma to sort of pit these different values. Do you let more people live, or do you actively do harm to somebody who otherwise would not have been harmed so that you can save more people? And there's a bunch of variations on thought experiments. This is just like one example, but I've had these talks with like these science people, and they will dead ass just be like, well, this is a completely implausible situation. Why would there be people tied to the tracks? And it's unrealistic that a trolley would lose control. And why is there a lever here that can, for some reason, derail the track in this direction? Or like they'd be like, I would find some alternative answer to find out so I could save everybody. And it's just like, they are seriously like not getting the point that it's a philosophical thought experiment, mental way of sort of, again, pitting these different values so that you can characterize what it's like to, the human emotions and morals, and, ultimately lead to like, philosophical theories and things like that. But they can't even get past the part, they just can't even like use their imagination, like a 2 steps to even think, like, to just take the situation at face value. And if you were to put that person, I think, into reading just War and Peace and to do a critical analysis, they would be just as lost as a student in literature trying to calculate a derivative in reading that text and coming out with actual insightful, thought-provoking analysis about the text. So this division and like this intellectual lacking, I think it applies to both sides. And even just the idea of the sciences as being like mutually exclusive from the humanities. When people talk about this, they're like, you're either one or the other. But really, to me, the sciences and the humanities are just absolutely two complementary aspects of one another. And even something like philosophy, the origin of philosophy in its very beginnings was that it was also married with science. Like the same people who were discovering calculus and geometry were the same, they were writing treatises on, the moral and fundamental metaphysical nature of the universe. Even Plato, famously above his academy, had this saying, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter." That, honestly, hearing that from Plato, that was one of the, I've always been interested in math and stuff like that, but that alone was a huge push towards like, all right, I need to get my math game up. And just the whole idea, you know, with the sciences and stuff, you can take genuinely aesthetic, philosophical attitudes toward those things, and you know, vice versa. You could have a rigorous, logical method of thinking towards, you know, the humanities and philosophy. The whole reason that I'm even taking math in the first place is actually out of basically, you know, reasons of aesthetics. Like when you hear people like Einstein and Feynman and all the people at the highest level of math, when they talk about it, they talk about it as a genuinely beautiful aesthetic experience. Albert Einstein says mathematics is the poetry of logical ideas. And every scientist says that to truly understand the universe, you have to understand the universe in which it is speaking, which they all say comes down to mathematics. And just throughout my life, anytime I get interested in something and I go far enough down the rabbit hole, every single time the wall I hit is math. I just don't understand the math. I don't understand the physics. And on the meantime, you have the people at the highest level talking about how it's genuinely beautiful and aesthetic. So it's like, all right, the final straw. Plato says you got no geometry, so it's like, all right, I'm signing up next thing. And I started from the bottom. I started basically at like pre-calculus, and I've worked my way up, and it's been grueling, but I'm finally starting to get to the point where it's actually starting to get super sick, and I'm really looking forward to what it looks like in the future. But the point is, the division between the sciences and the humanities is completely artificial, and I think it's just only been detrimental to intellectual thought. Like, I just, in another video on Big Nate's Book Reviews, home of the best book reviews, I was going through Feynman, and he's talking about the knowledge of science, it only adds to your general understanding and appreciation of the universe. It doesn't subtract, it only adds. So it's like, this is just another angle from which to appreciate and explore the beauty and mystery of life. Am I right? So as to the question of which is harder, the sciences or the humanities, I'm gonna say neither. They're both equally important. They're qualitatively different, and they're both necessary for a full understanding of the world. So anyway, I'm sure I got a lot of opinions on this, so let me know if you're from the sciences, let me know what you think. If you're from the humanities, let me know what you think, or just in general. I'm curious what people's thoughts are on this whole division in the first place. In the meantime, thank you for watching the Big Nate Review. Make sure to smash that subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at Big Nate's Book Reviews. And without further ado, thank you for watching the Big Nate Review.